Okay, well, I'll start and get the ball rolling, shall I? Well, I'd like to ask, I guess, everyone on the panel about the sort of the subhead of this book. It's Hong Kong 2020, Reflections on a Borrowed Place. I'd wonder what that sense of borrowing means to you, and if you still think it applies. But who wants to take it? Sure, yeah.
I mean, I think borrowed is it's a nice, one of those nice ambiguous words, like the poets like. But I think certainly for expatriates and non-Chinese who've made their home in Hong Kong, it's absolutely borrowed. From whom and for how long, we don't know. But it's borrowed and maybe never returned, I suppose. It's clear if you're not Chinese, I suppose.
Me to say something?
There's no need.
No, I would say, expanding on that, I feel that Hong Kong still is a borrowed place. You know, we still have a deadline. We still have 2047 to look forward to, and you know, the best one can say is that the authorities on the other side of the border are tolerating and biding their time until they can just finally swallow the place and it becomes another Chinese city like we all seem to worry about. I do feel this is a borrowed place, and it always has been. Anyone else?
Anyone else? Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please. We should be getting you a microphone at some point. Oh, we'll just give you this.
It's not a question, but I just want to say thank you so much. I was a foreign correspondent for Channel 7 Australia back 20 years ago, and I remember that rainy night very, very clearly. And I thought you captured that just so beautifully. And I think, you know, Chris, I love what you said as well, because I have returned. I've come back 3 years ago, and so I've seen the changes from back then. And what really struck me so much when I came back and I walked down the streets when Occupy Central was happening, was that all the younger generation of your age who weren't born or were only very small during that time, you know, Hong Kong didn't even have a second to breathe from one colonial ruler to the next sovereign power. And what struck me is how fiercely proud you are to be Hong Kong Chinese. Because back when the British were here, I felt that the ones that were successful were the David Tangs, the one that aspired to wealth. And we all thought back then, oh, they're not political, the Hong Kong Chinese, they just don't care. They only worship money. But what was so beautiful was all you younger generation being so fiercely, proudly Hong Kong and finding your identity despite those rulers, and that you were political, and Joshua Wong and all of those guys are now standing up. And Louisa, I was a foreign correspondent that night. My God, you described my night as well. Anyway, thank you so much. It was very nostalgic for me.
Anyone else? Yes, you, sir. Over there.
Can I get a bit?
Oh, sorry, Chris, yes.
It's a pleasure. Going back to the borrowed place thing and what you said, I'm thinking about the piece and writing it with editing with Sarah. I was trying to find, are there any differences between me and my father or two generations? And at the end, I found that, yes, he grew up in a different place. He grew up with a different background. He has different ways of thinking things about the news, about politics or whatsoever. But at the end, it seems like it's not really a borrowed place after all, because he has nowhere to go either. He came from China. He's lived in Hong Kong for like 30-something years right now. He's more or less a Hong Konger as well. Well, he has some like affiliation with his hometown, so does mine for Hong Kong. But he's been here for so long that he's picked up some trails of Hong Kong people that we're more or less just the same. So I guess for our generation, or even for his generation, is that this is not exactly a borrowed place, because we were either born here or raised here or choose to move here. Then we have nowhere else to go. Then we only have this identity, really.
Okay. you sir, you had a question? Yes.
George Russell, I'm a freelance reporter here. In a city that is known for sort of primarily money-making, property, capitalism, the embodiment of a financial centre, how is it an inspiration for poetry, I have to ask?
So before I came, I was doing some preparation work for my class on Friday. I know why I wanted to teach Chongqing Express and the urban space in Hong Kong. And then I think we have to think about the notion of lived space versus the space that, it's not my idea, it's Lefebvre, Henry Lefebvre's idea, the lived space, space that's emotionally charged, versus the space that is scientifically and structurally constructed to represent Hong Kong. So there's a representation of space, and there's a representational space that we're talking about here. I think conflicts and tension are good things to start with. We don't need arts anymore if everyone is happy about everything, right? So there's plenty of inspiration here in Hong Kong, I would say, for poetry, But not for the sustainability of poetry, though. Okay, so it's something that we can think about. So support Pen Hong Kong, yeah.
Well, to answer your question, I think for me it will be to be observant, especially as we talked about like today, how like Hong Kong has been changing constantly. So I think, and if we are living here, we may not be aware of the changes, and they're so subtle. So, like, I think being observant and then really go into the quotidian, the daily life, I think that's the inspiration come from.
I also would like to say something about this. Both poetry and fiction can really thrive in Hong Kong. However, I don't think that this is a place purely for money or real estate. That money and real estate make it a difficult place for writers because we still need to live somewhere, and possibly somewhere not too expensive. But what has been happening in the past 20 years has been so politically important that at times the space for a more poetic look, which wishes not to be political, feels nearly futile or nearly too frivolous. At the same time, to fight for that space, to fight for within oneself, to fight for the freedom of writing about something frivolous in spite of this overwhelming political black cloud that Hong Kong has been under, is one of the most liberating feeling I find, and the most stimulating feeling about being a writer in Hong Kong.
Not about poetry, but about arts in general. And it's something that I noticed very early on when I came here, long before the handover, and I had discussions with other artists, in that I found this, it was more so then, I found this to be a society where a lot of awful things were going on, and people were afraid to speak out, and they're still afraid to speak out. They're afraid to speak their minds. And I believe that artists, writers, cartoonists, filmmakers, create works that act as a catharsis for people. So I can give you an example just from my own experience, okay? When I was doing cartoons regularly in the newspaper, of course these cartoons were often very political. I wasn't the only one. And I would often get feedback from people saying, oh, you really hit the nail on the head, and you really said the truth. And I would always respond saying, thank you. If you agree with me, write a letter to the newspaper. And they'd always, every single one would say, oh, no, we do business in China, or my boss wouldn't like it. And I was having lunch one day with Junji, the leading, at least at the time, leading Chinese cartoonist locally. And I asked him, is it the same for him? He said, absolutely the same. And we realized that this wasn't a bad thing, that people saw cartoons, and they also see the movies, at the time, especially the movies, as their expression of the things that they were feeling. At least someone was saying it. They might have been afraid to say it. And when I had discussions about this overseas with cartoonists and writers in other places, they were envious of me. Because in the US and UK, well, everyone speaks out. The cartoons and the writers, they're not that important. But here, the arts are very important in expressing what people are afraid to say themselves, and they deserve more support from everybody.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Louisa, actually. I grew up in Hong Kong. I think we had a common school headmistress in Mrs. Handyside. But my question is really around your final thought, which I found very intriguing, you know, the way you felt on July the 1st. I just wondered how you feel now, 20 years on. Has that changed, or is it still the same? I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that.
Thank you for that question. I mean, I do think that there was this kind of tremendous short-sightedness, that no one really looked past that moment of departure. And I think that still I mean, it's the same issue again and again, isn't it? Everybody just assumed that 2047 would not come, or that there would be no Chinese Communist Party, or that everything would be different. And yet, inexorably, day after day, it creeps closer. So I do think, I don't know really how much that has changed. I mean, I'm not sure what other people on the panel have to say about this. My piece is also, I think, particularly personal piece, coming from my own peculiar background. I don't know if other people have the same experience or not. But to me, you know, it does feel as if we haven't really learned that much from the mistakes that we made then.
Well, I just often said that, don't worry about 2047, it's already come. Technically, as a journalist, I always tell people, I tell my reporters and stuff, there's only one Article 5 in the Basic Law that said, in 50 years, Hong Kong gets to keep its capitalism and way of life. But what is capitalism? What is socialism right now? So if you mean socialism may be implemented in Hong Kong by 2047, isn't it now already?
Can I ask a very selfish question? Could I ask as many members of the panel as would like to answer this question, to tell the audience what you think is the best Hong Kong novel available in English, so it can be translated into English if it was written in Chinese? Best Hong Kong novel that we can read in English, because unfortunately I don't read Chinese. So either translated or...
Timothy Mo. He's also a mix-up, is that what I'm supposed to say? He's now living in Bangkok, but he's written, I think, some of the best. He writes in English. The reason why he writes in English is because, being a novelist, he said he doesn't want to be someone who writes small speech, being the Chinese translation of novel, 小说. And so he says, I'd rather write in English because novel sounds better. He's written one historical, very thick book called An Insular Possession. He's written another which is about, actually a film was also made from the one on the Monkey King. I don't think, the Monkey King has been made into a movie? I don't think so. No, has it? Monkey King is set in Hong Kong, and then there is one which is set in the UK, and it's a group of Hong Kong people who open a restaurant in the UK. And that is the one has been made into a movie. Sweet and Sour, thank you. So I recommend everything he's written, but it's not the most up to, it's not contemporary, it's all under British rule. Now he's not living here anymore, he's living in Thailand. Anything more recent?
I am a little bit skeptical about lists because, the top 10 American poetry that you should read this year. People just read those 10. I don't think Hong Kong literature has a strong foundation to give only lists because at the same time you're ruling out the possibilities. But yet to start with, Timo is well studied, well researched on by academics. At the same time, local writers are Han Leizhu, Dorothy C., Pun Guoling, Dong Kai-Zhang. These people are marvelous, and I think we do have a translation series in Hong Kong of their work, right? Sorry, Atlas. Atlas is the name of the title, right, of the book of Dong Kai-Zhang, right? Okay, Atlas. We can talk more about that later. We have, once again, world-class translators working on these Chinese writers as well. So, read all.
Anyone? Yes, Simon.
Simon Pritchard. I was a journalist in 1997, working in Hong Kong. Just to follow up on Doug's question, do we think that anybody has really, any writers in the English language or in Chinese have done justice to the environment that has been post-colonial Hong Kong? A lot of, obviously, which we talked about, were books pre-1997. So because I struggle, frankly, to think of something if I was to recommend, but I'm wondering if amongst the brains on the panel there is something you could recommend.
I guess I'd say, look to the poets first. They always get there first. And that's where, partly because it's shorter as well, but that is where you find, and that's what's, I think, so exciting about our sort of poetry section here, is that, and again, I think it's futile to look for the definitive Hong Kong novel. You're looking for a really good novel, which happens to be about Hong Kong, one aspect of Hong Kong. And that's the whole point, I suppose, if that's helpful at all.
Hi, my name is Yanti. I am from Singapore who has become a Hong Konger. I actually have a question for editors. Is that okay to ask? Well, borrowed place, borrowed time, and borrowed place made it to the title, so I'm wondering how that choice was made.
Sorry. Well, we actually debated about the name endlessly. We went through weeks of what appropriate subtitle to be used. But I think to pick up on what Larry said earlier, I think there's always a sense of transience in Hong Kong, that nothing we have lasts, right? We were handed back to China in '97, and we thought, well, maybe that's the end of it. But no, the clock continues to tick. We're 20 years into that clock ticking, and we have another 30 years to go. Nobody knows what the future holds. And it's that sense of transience. Nothing we own really belongs to us. That makes us feel that the place is borrowed and the time is borrowed. I know there's a sort of a bit of a colonial color to it because a lot of people use the borrowed place and borrowed time to describe a colonial Hong Kong. But I think that's exactly where the irony is. Even after we've been handing back to China, we continue to feel that way. And that's why we felt that the name is quite appropriate for our anthology.
Just to add, sort of almost in a literal physical sense, the physical landscape of Hong Kong changes so fast and so continuously that, in a sense, whatever you're living now is a fleeting borrowed moment. And the 2020 was sort of a pun on 20 years and 2020 vision. Hindsight is always 2020, they say. Anyway, we played with that.
Hi. Whoever feels like answering this, I'm a journalist. I'm based in Hong Kong. No, I'm based in Beijing. Don't know why that came out. But yeah, that might be. So one thing that struck me, I arrived just a few days ago, and clearly with my Beijing background, if this was Beijing and on the eve of a historic anniversary, we would have, billboards everywhere, very, very specific information about what exactly it is, and and faces and logos. So I arrive here, and I have no physical feeling of this, because you go along the streets and it doesn't really feel like that's happening. I see very, very shy slogans, very, very few with, there's these things about I took a picture, but I keep forgetting the Together Progress Opportunity. And if it wasn't because there is a 20 on the top of it, I wouldn't know what it is. There is no flag. There are no words. It feels really, really, really low profile. And I saw some flags somewhere else, but really, really very few. This is from an outsider coming from Beijing. But you guys are here. How does it feel like day by day approaching this anniversary? The coverage that you hear, or other things that as an outsider, I can only compare to a very different place. Thank you, and sorry for the length of the question.
I think maybe you're just talking about yesterday. We're just doing a story today, so go check the Western Harbour Tunnel. It's now filled with flags and slogans and all that stuff. Yeah, it just happened like yesterday or today. I don't know why they were late, but it's now everywhere. We're just doing a story today about all the Chinese flag, Hong Kong flags, even in a wet market. And check out all the shopping malls, buildings owned by Sino Properties. I don't know why, but every property owned by Sino Properties, every single door, they have Chinese flags, Hong Kong flags. But just one trivia, the boss of the Sino Properties is from Singapore.
There's also the main event will happen in Wan Chai, but for a number of reasons in the more rural areas, in the new territories, you have, I talk about this group later on in the piece I was reading, the rural committee, that are so keen to show how patriotic they are. And so the new territories are fully covered in the red flags, and some make very little sense because they also, to make it cheerful, they also put some pink ones, some yellow ones, and then the big red ones. So we are kind of an awkward pride sort of parade, which isn't about pride at all, but just about trying to, to show how patriotic you are so that you can continue having the privileges that the pro-Beijing authorities have been giving you. And the reason why you don't see it so much, of course, is because we are still 20 years into the 50 of no change. Change has come, but some appearances remain there. And to have the whole city turned into a pre-Olympics Beijing would grate maybe too much. So you only have little places that turn into a pre-Olympic Beijing. And I think it tries to retain a fake individual initiative feeling instead of just a massive thing. So as Chris was saying, then it's a certain business who say, oh, let's put the flag and show where we stand. Or in the New Territories case, the cook who says, oh, let's show that we are so patriotic. Things are still a bit different.
it was printed in Shenzhen and brought across the border without any problems. Probably in Beijing they wouldn't have an event like this.
Because we did, so I'm one of the editors on the anthology, and we actually had to have a discussion about where to print the book. There is a lot of mention of Tiananmen in this book, and there's a lot of mention of politics and independence, and Joshua Wong, who's not with us. And I don't even know if he's been arrested yet for his occupation tonight, but he has an essay in it. So we actually talked with the publisher about whether or not we could feasibly print this in Shenzhen, because many printers are refusing to even print books with any mention of sensitive political topics in them because they're fearful of their businesses on the mainland being shut down. And we have people here who can talk about that because it's hurt their business personally. So it's not even publishing, it's just printing the books can get them in trouble. And the second issue was, if they print the book, are we going to be able to get it back into Hong Kong in time for this event? And I was having visions of sending our interns running over to Shenzhen and smuggling them over the border, but luckily that didn't happen, and we did get the books back in. But I don't want anyone to think that that decision was made lightly or that that is always the case. We were very lucky. So I just wanted to say that. So that's something we think about at Penn as well. We represent publishers and printers, and this is one of the issues we're fighting for.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a beautiful book and a beautiful set of diverse readings. Indeed, there's not one Hong Kong. I wanted to share just very quickly, 20 years ago, I was started out in New York, and then I went to Beijing, and then I came down here for handover on handover night. And this whole evening makes me think that the things that really disturbed me then still disturb me now. And that was the handover ceremony was in English and in Putonghua, in many cases very poor Putonghua. And Cantonese was not spoken at all, so I was very happy to hear Cantonese spoken tonight. And the second thing was that I remember my uncles, when I came down, we went out for dinner and we watched the fireworks, etc. And my uncles were saying, and my father, who hated the communists and what happened in his village in Guangdong and Toisan, he said, "送嗰啲英國鬼走啊." And he was really happy to kick those Brits out. And that night, if you all remember, the restaurants were 送英國走. They were giving out free bottles of British wine, which is the Cantonese for kick the Brits out. So there was a lot of humor then, too, I think. And I also remember Gong Li at Shanghai Tong. And everyone was buying Chipots, if you remember. And even the young, very young Hong Kongers with their jeans were wearing Chinese tops, very proud to be Chinese. And so I think all of that, if we think about that, and I had real fears for the future of one country, two system. I did think of it and described it as a borrowed place on borrowed time, borrowing Ray Charles' phrase. But I did think it was a recolonization. I didn't think it was a return. I really felt that it was being recolonized by an even bigger bully. So I think it would be interesting to hear some of your reactions to those themes, which I feel very deeply is still what we're struggling with right now, and that none of that has been reassuring.
I'm not sure if you guys know the term localist, basically so-called more radical activists. And there's a joke among localists, is that if you want to go to a Mandarin-free area, go to the light rail in the northwestern New Territories, because the distance between each station is so short, they can't fit in Mandarin announcements. That's only English and Cantonese. But to otherwise answer the other question, my father in this book, he ran, after he came to Hong Kong, he actually went back to China to work, how do you say, he owns a factory, basically. So I was actually, I think, the first generation earlier than most people, young people, to learn Mandarin, although it still wasn't so good. But I guess it depends how you grew up. Even though I learned Mandarin earlier than other people, I just don't think I felt connected in any way, really. As I tell my friends, when they're starting to watch some mainland shows broadcast in Hong Kong TV, I just said, oh, I'd rather watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or like Sherlock and so on.
Well, I guess I'll just say that I was here at the time of the handover in '97, and being Indian, of course, I kept thinking, where is Hong Kong's Mahatma Gandhi? And in fact, we have an essay in here by Chip Tsao who says exactly that Hong Kong didn't breed Mahatma Gandhi or Ho Chi Minh or any of the, Aung San Suu Kyi. But I was 20 years too early. And the fact is that Hong Kong was not ready perhaps for the sense of its own identity, and we needed this new generation to think about these things. Whether it's what's going to happen, nobody knows. I've been thinking a lot about Asterix and Obelix recently. I don't know if anybody read Asterix and Obelix, but it always starts out with, the Roman Empire has taken over the entire swathe of land, but there's this one little indomitable village of, Gauls who've basically, who've chosen to define who they are in a different way. And it sort of makes me think a bit about Hong Kong, is that we are in some ways this anachronism, this leftover thing forgotten by history. There's no other place in the world that I can think of like Hong Kong, which didn't have a violent, bloody demand for freedom for its future. It was just peacefully handed over from one place to the other, and is now struggling to figure out who they are, who we are, and where we belong.
Hi, and just to really quickly respond to the point about Hong Kong being recolonized, we have a wonderful essay in the book written by Stephen Vines, and the title is called China's New Colony, which would exactly address the question you have. So buy the book and read that chapter.
Great. I think we're coming up on time. We've got time for one very quick question if anyone has something brief. No? Well, in that case, please join me in thanking the panel. We have Chris Cheng, Mishi Saran, Larry Fain, Ilaria Maria Sala, Marco Yan, Nicholas Wong, and Louisa Lim. My thanks also to the FCC staff who've been wonderful this evening, and thank you to you all for coming out.